All
Josh,
right.
how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing fantastic. I understand that you might be a bit tired today.
Yeah, it's a beautiful Wednesday, or is it still Tuesday? I don't know. I was up responding to some alerts last night, but nothing too bad. But yeah, so I'm a little tired, but hey, it comes with the territory, right?
It certainly does. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think working in engineering, especially, alerts are just going to be part of the game. And do you have like pager duty where you work, or
Yeah, we use Ops Genie.
okay,
Um, yeah, so, but yeah, I mean, boy, yeah, PagerDuty, Nagios. I remember maybe that's dating me. I don't know. Do people still use Nagios?
I haven't heard anyone using that for a bit. Yeah, and I mean, I don't know. Maybe there's still people that use like physical pagers or something too. I mean, that might still be a thing. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like fax machines.
Yeah.
Uh, I heard this funny story. I worked for a company in the travel agency space, and apparently fax machines are still used a lot in that area for hotel bookings. Hotels still use them. In the space I'm at now, dentist offices, they still use fax machines a bit. And I remember hearing a story about a guy who had just saved up fax machines in a storage unit for years and years and years, and now made pretty good money selling them to the people who still use them. So you never know, that storage room full of pagers that you have, Joe, could really come out
They
handy.
might, they literally in that case. Yeah. So awesome. Well, for people who don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro?
Sure, yeah. My name is Joshua Bowles, and I work right now at a company called Weave. I've worked at a lot of startups in the Utah Valley area, and mostly in the BI world, the data world. My background is actually in linguistics, both kind of traditional and documentary linguistics, but also formal and computational and mathy type of linguistics. Um, and so that's kind of the bridge of how I ended up in software and software engineering. It's a subfield of AI, and that's how I always ended up wherever I worked somehow in the data space, close to BI or any of that stuff, because I was um, always looking for opportunities and trying to push the startups that I was at to adopt any kind of ML, particularly with natural language, since that was kind of my thing. So yeah, that's kind of, I guess, the quick intro to me.
Nice. Yeah. And you're currently in, where's that? St. George, Utah. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. I live in St. George, Utah. I've been here for 7 years, and I've
Nice.
worked full time remote all of those years.
That's cool.
So
That's really cool. We can get
yeah.
into that too. I've always wondered about, dev or data people who work in, I guess, St. George is in a small town, but it's not a big town. But I guess there's no town in Utah that's really big by Manhattan standards or anything, right? Or LA.
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah.
that's interesting. I mean, kind of rewinding though. But you talked about your background in linguistics, NLP. I mean, when did you get into that?
Um, I got into that even as an undergraduate. I actually wanted to be a novelist,
Oh,
and I thought, oh yeah, so I signed up for an English degree and realized, oh, there's this thing called linguistics, which is the science of language. And I thought, well, if you understand the science of language, then you should probably be able to write a better book. And
interesting.
then I fell in love with linguistics, and a lot of mathematical logic, and realized that there was actually a very rich tradition of logic and kind of cross pollination of ideas between very early computer science stuff like the 1950s and even back into the 1930s. I don't know if there was computer science in the 1930s, but yeah, there's yeah.
Oh no, I mean, it was definitely the foundations of computer science for developing back then. I don't think they had the,
Yeah.
but
Yep.
it's
And so
interesting.
yeah, and so originally, yeah, it was just because I liked language and I wanted to work with it. And as I got more and more into a lot of the formalization and the mathy side of things, I was never much of an algebra or calculus person, but once I got into the kind of math where some of the foundations of computer science and linguistics converge. So a lot of meta mathematics
Hmm.
and logic and stuff like that. I really just kind of fell in love with it. And at that time, artificial intelligence was a thing and machine learning was a thing. But I remember being laughed at in graduate school when I talked about neural networks. People were like, "What? Neural networks? Silly, silly stuff."
That's so true, though. There was a period of time when neural networks were written off for dead. A few other mathematicians slash
Yeah,
machine learning people who said, "Yeah, these are dumb. They're black boxes. They don't work. These are useless." And
yeah,
yeah, I don't know. So,
yeah. It was, yeah, it was. I remember, and it was actually in a computer program called Pratt, Praat, and we used that to do a lot of voice analysis, a lot of acoustics, physical acoustics, and stuff like that. And it had a couple of neural network things that you could use for doing some analysis and stuff. And yeah, so my interest in that grew, and then I ended up I wanted to be in academia for I had the blinders on to be in academia
mm,
and do formal linguistics and then one summer I didn't have enough money, for the teaching load I was doing, and so I went and convinced the company to hire me for an internship for the summer. And they were like, "Oh, you do AI stuff? Okay, well, I got this task. You should let's do some AI stuff." And it was around trying to build an automated bid system for like SEO keyword bidding with Google AdWords. Um, and we did actually build something like that, and it worked too well, which
oh,
was funny. Yes.
what do you mean by too well?
So the night we released it, we were like, "Hey, here we go. We're gonna do this. It's gonna be great." And then we came in the next day, and the guy who was the manager, he came running up to me, and he's like, "We made like 17 grand and blah 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 or this or that." I can't remember what the numbers were, but he was very excited, but there was this tone of kind of worry. And so I thought, well, we just made a bunch of money. Why are you worried? He was worried because we blew through the entire budget, like the whole month's worth of budget. So the system was bidding on keywords properly, and it was and it was doing its job, but we hadn't really built in anything to account for the budget.
Oh,
So so we kind of blew through the whole budget. So it was kind of a bittersweet thing. So um, that was how I got into the business world. And after 3 months, I was like, "Hey," I was surprised. I remember being very surprised that I thought I could be happy doing that and not working in a university. So I've been in businesses ever since.
that's really cool. I mean, what's interesting now is AI. And I talked about kind of more formal AI, right? I guess like a linguistic sort of, classically linguistics is really, um, sort of bordered on, I guess classical AI. Like if you look at like old books by like Peter Norvig and such, right? It's like,
Mhm. Mhm.
those texts are very much like symbolic reasoning and so forth, which
Yeah.
as far as I know, I'm not an expert in this stuff, but it seems to intersect with the um, a lot of stuff that's in linguistics. But it's interesting seeing this because this stuff is making a massive comeback now because of the popularity of large language models.
Yeah.
It's interesting seeing a lot of this stuff. I don't know if it's being rediscovered, but it's
I think it's not being rediscovered. If there is some rediscovery, it's in people realizing that this stuff was that the rules based approach, right? So that's kind of yeah, and that is where I came out. It was called knowledge engineering,
mm,
rules based approach. I learned most of this on my own by just going and grabbing AI books from the '90s,
mm-hmm.
and that's kind of also how I learned to program a little bit as well. And they
Interesting.
were, yeah, but the books from the '90s, the AI language at that time was Lisp.
Mm-hmm.
So, and yeah, so it was very rules based, and that fit pretty well with with some of the more popular theoretical linguistics frameworks that wanted to be very rules based and say no, we need to figure out this kind of recursive logical model. This is how we generate sentences in our brain. But I I was always kind of like, well, why wouldn't we use statistics and probability? Every other science uses it for
Right.
things. Why can't linguists use it? And I remember getting advice from a professor that I wrote to in New York saying, "Yeah, don't mess with statistics. It won't be good for your career."
Mm.
And I thought, wow, I said that's kind of not a good thing. If if trying to use statistics and probability in a scientific endeavor, whether it's a hard science or a social science, whatever you go, if that's not good for your career, then maybe I should look for a different career. Is kind of what I was thinking at the point.
Interesting.
So yeah, and then the rise of statistical and probabilistic techniques. It was just impossible to argue with the results, whether you had a theoretical, axe to grind, or there were some legitimate limitations in that way of doing it. It was just so hard though to deny the fact that it just worked so well, and I think we're still seeing that.
Mm-hmm.
The secret though is that you look at Google and they have their knowledge graph. That's a form of rules based knowledge engineering. And I remember I got a recruiter email a couple of years ago to work on ontologies at Apple. And yeah, so an ontology is kind of effectively the same thing as like a knowledge graph, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a graph structure or maybe a tree root structure, and you've got the root, and you go up and down, and you can search it and traverse it, and that's where you get that kind of classical AI, like A star search and breadth versus depth search and that kind of stuff. But the idea is that you would essentially create kind of like an entity map, or you would allow these each node to have tuples or tuples, right? Maybe three characteristics or three properties. And so a really simple example would be, you might want to have a root node of animate objects. And then maybe way, way, way down, you've got, like a certain breed of a dog, right? And so by simply traversing the kind of logical graph, you don't need to know that a breed of a dog is an animate object. Meaning you don't have to hard code it because you just traverse the graph up to get that property, right? And so, yeah, so I think, and I don't know because I've never worked at Google or Apple, and I don't know anybody who works on these. But when you look at a lot of the products and stuff, I see a lot of still rules based AI being used in concert with statistical and probabilistic techniques. And for many years, I've always tried to imagine, what that kind of more balanced or hybrid approach might look like, where you've got these statistical and probabilistic techniques that are more of a kind of a big net, right? That you're just, I just need to make sense of all of the world. So maybe you would use statistical and probabilistic techniques there. And then once you've restricted the domain to a very specific thing, you may want to switch to a rules-based technique because it'll just be more efficient.
It's interesting. Yeah,
I haven't.
Oh, sorry, what were you saying?
Well, I haven't really seen any systems that are built like that, though. They're kind of hybrid like that, where there's a switch. But I anticipate that the pendulum will swing back, and you'll see.
It could be. I'm starting to see some literature on large language models incorporating knowledge graphs to handle the hallucination problem from large language models. So we'll see. I mean, I need to dive more into this, and but my one of my friends, she's way into taxonomy, and she's a professionally trained taxonomist, so she's
cool.
Yeah. So it's interesting, but we're in a fascinating period of time too, where I feel like you're definitely seeing a convergence of various techniques that I think up to now have kind of been. I hate to use the word religion with respect to techniques, but I think that this is apt. Even that email that you said from that professor, where they're dissuading you from statistical techniques because for whatever reason, I'm not sure the motivation for saying that, but they did send an email saying that, so that's an opinion that they have. But I've seen camps where it's like, deep learning is the only way to go for everything, and if you're not using that, then it's crap and so forth. But what's interesting now is you're starting to see various techniques, combining, and some being dusted off, like go to the bin and find it and blow off the dust and then incorporate it into these very powerful kind of mainstream techniques now. But it's a cool time in the space. So
and from a data point of view, I always advise people, and it's usually my first thought when I want to solve a problem. I think, maybe I'll use kind of a deep learning approach. That should not be the baseline, right? The baseline should probably be something else before you say, now I need this kind of black box magical, right? Because let's be honest, I mean, LLMs are magical. I read so there's a paper by a guy named Mikolov, I think it was 2013, where that's kind of the modern, really where the modern point, I think, in word vectors and word embeddings kind of takes off. And he's like, this isn't anything new. We're just talking about word distributions, how a word is distributed throughout a corpus, right? But he was able to say, no, but here's a really good way to represent words as numbers. And if you haven't read that paper, it's not I think a difficult or long paper, but I remember when he goes through the example and he shows, look, if you take the word vector for king and the word vector for man, and you subtract them, you get the word vector for queen. And it's just like, what? That's kind of crazy.
Just the word to vec paper, right? Sounds example. Yeah.
I don't think I'm the title of the actual paper escapes you right now. So I can't remember.
It has the steamy title of Efficient Estimation of Word Representations in Vector Space.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's if you go look for the word vector or the word to vec or the word embedding paper, you won't find it using those keywords, but yeah.
Yeah, because this came out of
Um,
Google, right? I think it's because Jeff Dean was the other
mhm,
person on this paper. That's how I remember this one. Yeah,
mhm.
yeah. This was a
Yeah.
yeah, this was a big deal when it came out.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It was massive, and I still refer this paper to people as well. Um, and you know that in fact, we were in a workshop the other day, and they were talking about the attention paper. Attention is all you need, which
Hmm.
is kind of the modern. Well, I shouldn't say modern, but the Transformers paper,
Yeah.
right? And I was kind of like, hey, this other paper that we should probably read as well, which is maybe doesn't get as much attention now. Um, but man, I remember reading that paper and just being like, that's absolutely insane. And it made me want to really understand the data, right?
Mm.
And the transformations and a lot of the data engineering that goes into that feature building. And and nowadays, if you are trying to solve a problem and you just go reach for, now it's all cloud. The cloud provider offerings are just, again, it's just kind of like magical in a way. You're like, whoa, I can have a large language model working on a problem, in such a fast time because all these services are up and running. You When you do that, you lose familiarity with the data that you're working with, right?
Mm.
Unless you're already really, really familiar with it. And from a company point of view and solving problems, there's always something that worries me about that. Of like, oh, we're going to go solve this problem, but we're not even going to look at the data. We're just going to hand it over,
Mm.
right? And let the magic do its magic. And so, I always advise, yeah, maybe try solving the problem with a simpler technique, an easier technique, and at least get a baseline. But also, it forces you to get your hands dirty, right, and get into the
Right.
data. Um, and so, yeah, I think that's always a good thing. And then if you establish a baseline with a simpler technique, right? Like maybe it's just a kind of a classification or a
Right.
regression problem. Um, then you can then at least compare that to then a deep learning approach and
Mm.
see, did it actually, is there much of a difference? So that's one thing that concerns me too, like with things like Chat GPT and other things where
Mm.
we just assume that it just works. And I don't see a lot of talk about, well, how are you testing Chat GPT? If you're using it in your company to do something, right?
Hmm.
Not how OpenAI tests it, right? Not how there are various protocols now or standards, I think, that are starting to come out to say, hey, this is the kind of analysis we need to do on the data that's being used to train these things, and the this and the that. Google, I think just last week, released a kind of a conceptual framework for security for AI, um, which is cool, seeing all these things come out. But like, if it's your company and you're using an LLM that's been already been trained for you and just works, right?
Hmm.
You're using it to respond to customers. Um, Great, but I don't see a lot of conversation from people about how they're then verifying, like, the relevance of the responses and the engagement, the quality of the engagement between a human and let's say
Right.
a dialogue. And so it always makes me wonder. I'm like, well, how is everybody tracking that? Because I think it's hard.
Well,
I,
it's really hard. I mean, it's hard enough when you have control of your own data and you're trying to make sense of it, right? And then you're throwing a new interface on top of it, right? So I've been having this discussion a lot with friends who have, they work more in the data tooling space. They have new, say, BI startups and throwing large language models into the mix now. And the central question really is, well, okay, so the problem of like having a natural language interface on top of data, that's pretty cool. You can just chat with your data. But to your point, the big question is, well, how do you know that it's correct? And even, this actually something I talked about the other day with on my podcast with Colin Zima, who runs Omni, which is a new BI startup as well. But it's like, even if, say, the data inputs are correct, right? There's no question about if the data itself that's been trained on is correct. It's because you're still dealing with a non-deterministic process.
Yeah.
In terms of getting an answer back, the way it might convolute the answer may actually make the answer still incorrect, even though it's trained on the correct data inputs. And so that's a risk. So to your point, even if you have the right data, it still could give you a wrong answer.
Yeah. And even, I think it's even scary. Well, I shouldn't say scary, but it's even more problematic than that, where if you're talking about things like, the relevance and the quality, say you've got a dialogue agent or some chat agent that's dealing with angry customers, right? Mm-hmm. Which is a thing I like to point out a lot, because if you've ever done that kind of work or known someone who's done that kind of work, it's not good, fun work. Right.
No, I worked in a call center when I was in college. I think I tolerated 2 weeks of that work. It sucked.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah. You may have done this.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, when you get into all this talk about like, oh, these new technologies or these new kinds of ways of automating things are going to replace job X and job Y. It's like, okay, well, there are some jobs where we know we probably want to not have people in because it's just not fun or cool, or even semi-ethical. I don't know that. Yeah, that's too far. We're dealing with angry customers. Is that an unethical job? I don't know, but say, yeah, you've got an agent that's doing that, and now you've been able to reduce the number of people that work at the call center, say, from 100 to 10, because you've got a nice way, an automated way of dispositioning the calls and handling most of the problems, and so the rest of the human workforce that's there only handles the really severe escalations that can't be solved automatically. How do you go about evaluating that the engagement between the customer and the dialogue agent is the kind of engagement that you want?
I mean, how do you normally do that, right? I mean, satisfaction score at the end of the call, like, did you get benefit out of this call or something? Or, I mean, how does it normally scored right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably what's really there, right? Is so this is what's interesting. It gets into what I like to talk about: built-in versus bolted on, right? So security is one of those things that you probably want built in, but this a feedback loop is one of the things that I say should be built in, right? And so yeah, if you're going to have this, this hypothetical call support or call center dialogue agent, probably built into that feature, right, is then either a survey or some way to capture the person who's engaging with that automated agent, a way to rate the experience, right, from day one. Right. Mm-hmm. So that would be the first indication, or the first thing that I would say you probably always want to have. And then secondarily after that, I've never built anything in that space, but what I've done in the stuff that I've worked with is just building a lot of audits, right?
Mm,
So going back over things that have been analyzed before, reanalyzing them or auditing them. And then of course there's all the testing that you want to do beforehand. And then I would think we're probably going to start getting into a position where we're building AI tools to evaluate other AI tools, right?
yep.
So some kind of reinforcement learning agent, right? That's like, okay, well, I'll go, or maybe you build a bot specifically, angry bot or something, right? To go interact with the dialogue agent that's in production, and that way you can capture and evaluate and manually inspect what that engagement looks like, right? And then maybe you have a whole suite of personalities, right, that you use to test against your dialogue agent in production in real time. But the interactions are isolated enough that you could actually go manually inspect that, right? Um, the other, yeah, but probably the big thing right now that I'm always pushing, yes, is if you can if you can capture the user's um, interaction or data or input or have them label data while you've got them, then that's the most useful.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something I remember years and years ago. Google released a free game, and it was just a fun little game, and they released it, and everyone was like, "Oh, did you go play this game? It was fun." And I was like, "No," and then I realized that the game was the actual objective of the game from Google's point of view is to get people to label images.
Yeah.
I can't remember. Maybe it was labeling images or something like that. But like, it gets to kind of the spirit of the way it used to be, where companies maybe kind of hid that a little bit. They're like, oh, we're going to make you play a game, but really you're labeling our data so that we can go play with
Well,
it.
they do that with CAPTCHA.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I mean, think about what you're doing. It's like, show me all the fire hydrants in this
Okay.
photo, right? It's like,
Yeah, yeah, you're
yeah,
right.
yeah. And the weird thing is, I don't know what's happened with CAPTCHA lately, but it's gotten super aggressive where it makes you go through like several rounds of images. So it's like,
Yeah,
find the school buses now. I'm like, am I being hazed for some initiation or something? Like, this is a lot of work.
yeah,
It's making the user experience pretty terrible with CAPTCHA, which is already pretty crap in my opinion. But no, I mean I mean, like you're training. It's
yeah.
like,
And that's a good point from a product point of view, right?
mm-hmm,
What's the tolerance that your users are willing? So, like in the call support example, if you have an angry customer, and maybe they get their thing resolved, but maybe they're still angry. Like, what's the likelihood that they're going to fill out some? How was your engagement? How did this go? Right?
right.
They're like, I'm upset. I don't want to fill out a survey about your bot.
Or if they do, it's going to be, just absolutely terrible, right?
Yeah, hated it.
Yeah. Like my 13-year-old kid, like one thing he likes to do is go on Google reviews and just read reviews for restaurants for some weird reason. And, you know, and especially likes to give thumbs up to the ones that are just absolutely scathing, which I'm like, all you're doing is reinforcing like the bubbling up. This is a popular response. He doesn't understand how this works, but it's, yeah, that's fascinating. When customer service too, it's sort of um, when you call somebody, right? I had to call this company the other day because a piece of furniture I bought, it's not living up to my expectations, and it's a very expensive piece of furniture, right? When I get on the call, though, I'm very civil because I don't want to be that guy who they use in training calls later, like this is how you deal with a frustrated customer.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I'm pretty upset, but the person on the other end too is like, this person doesn't have any idea like why I'm calling or or the context, so try and keep to a minimum. Plus, I worked in those kind of jobs, so I have a lot of empathy for just like crazy people that you meet on the other end of the phone. Dear Lord.
Yeah.
But it was one of these things where the initial interaction was okay. I go to the chat, right, and the chat doesn't work. And it's like, would you like to buy something? And it's like, not really. It's like, okay, call our number. I'm like, okay, I'll do that. Or send an email, which went on unread, for a week. And finally got a hold of somebody, and they were nice. I guess we'll find out if they actually come back. But just but it's like if you're upset though, right? There's a lot of these friction points. I guess what I'm getting to is a lot of these, like, there's a lot of friction to get your answer resolved. And I think this also compounds itself. So if you're the kind of person who's going to be, just innately pissed off at somebody, that it only makes you like fuming by the end of the call. That, like, why did it take this effort to done, right? So anything I'd give is going to be like, I don't know, probably not great. Any feedback?
Yeah, but and it's like now there's almost going to be like a customer support for customer support, right? Because if your customer support is now a complex piece of software, we all know what complex pieces of software eventually do, right? They eventually do something they're not supposed to. And so, it kind of reminds me too of some of the early, well, a couple of years ago. So a lot of the arguments about things like social prejudices and biases, right? Not model bias, right? Two very different things, so they can overlap, but in the sense that where, based on the training data, you may be, persisting and propagating existing biases and prejudices. Some of the arguments were, well, that's okay because society does it anyways, but we can always retrain the models later, and try and reduce that. But the counter argument to that was always, but with a human, you can change their mind. A human, maybe that one day they just wake up and suddenly they're like, whoa, I can't believe that I'm like a horrible person. I'm going to change, right? But when you've automated that, it's not going to change, like, ever, right? And so, so it's interesting when you think about like a call center and customer support where, you can't control the interaction of say an employee with an angry customer, but there's some bit of a comfort, right? Knowing that, okay, well, it's a human being and it's a person and they're talking to another person. There's a chance where, even if this employee is having a good day or a bad day, right? They might either make the customer more angry or less angry. But when that's automated, right? If the automated bot is somehow making every customer angry, you've now just scaled out a way to make all of your customers more angry, versus maybe one or two humans who are having a bad day, right? And the customer leaves even more angry. So it's like, I would like to see more conversation and more presentations about how everybody's handling those kinds of hypothetical scenarios. They're hypothetical now because I haven't. They're hypothetical to me because I haven't seen them, but I expect to start seeing some of those cases.
Same. Yeah, it's gonna be.
The interesting thing is, if you built a bot with, say, a simpler technique, the other thing that can come up, thinking about, say, making a bot that inadvertently makes all of your customers more angry, right? Maybe there was something in the data and in the transcripts that if you were a little more down into it, trying to get a baseline using simpler techniques and, having to munge around with the data more, you may have recognized, right? And seen and said, oh, actually we were going to do this, but now seeing a lot of these dialogue and transcripts, maybe we should make a different decision. And that's happened to me where, we had to do I was doing some topic modeling, and it was based on these SMS exchanges at a company I worked at before. And And as I was going through the data to do kind of the topic modeling, I found I found some credit card. I found a credit card number.
Oh,
Yeah, and so we found out that people were sending plain text credit card numbers sometimes in SMS, and so now we had those at rest, right? In the
oh dear.
Yeah, so we had to go scrub those out, right? And then be like, okay, people don't pass your credit card numbers and plain text in a text message. But if we would have taken a different approach and just said, "Oh yeah, just take all the transcripts and throw them into this thing over here, and it'll do all the feature vectorization for us, and it'll do all this," we may not have ever discovered that. Oh, whoops, we found some problem. We can go address it now. We may not have known if we hadn't been, looking at the data.
That's fascinating. It kind of makes you wonder too if as a lot of companies start adopting some sort of a chat AI interface, how easy would it be to game another company's AI and have it start producing negative models that will piss off customers, right? If I just I could just DDoS you with a bunch of of my own messages that I know will eventually have you retrain your data, make your model potentially worse. I don't know. Does that seem far fetched or?
No, it's my biggest nightmare.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. And so I was just reading the abstract on a paper about prompt injection, which conceptually is like SQL injection.
Yeah.
But that's effectively where they kind of, I think, are not the same. It's same concept, but very different. And it was what was the term? They were using a term. Basically, it meant like a hidden prompt injection. So there are these techniques where I'm not sure if they get into it in this paper, but I had read a summary about some research before where they were putting hidden text in the HTML of an open tab in the browser and able to inject into the prompt of another tab interacting with like some chat client or whatever. Ooh. And they were able to inject from another tab hidden text into that.
Sneaky. Right? Wow.
Yes. And my brain just explodes with all the different possibilities in terms of so you start to see the term poisoning, poisoning the training data set, and which is a little different than the typical ML stuff where your training data gets kind of corrupted or it's kind of gross. This is like intentional, all the way up to an imaginative scenario that's maybe a little far-fetched, but where you actually place particular text that is going to get scraped for training a model. Mm-hmm. And then once the model's trained and out live, you then use specialized prompts based on the text that you embedded into that training to try to do, so kind of more of a I'm gonna make a plant and then I'm gonna try and trigger behavior later.
Yeah, and you could boost it too. Say, oh yeah, this is a great response. You should keep doing that response, right?
Yeah.
So I wrote about this on LinkedIn several months ago, but when people started going crazy over the ChatGPT announcement, the first thing that came to mind was, oh crap! So you're going to have a way different version of SEO, way worse in some ways because you only get one response instead of a bunch of links. And I can imagine every SEO shop in the universe now is figuring out, okay, so how do I game this so my results come up first when things are asked, right?
Yeah. So, yeah, and from a data engineering point of view, right? Those are the people who are probably going to be asked to solve, data poisoning problem or prompt inject, right? And it's kind of like, wait, okay, how, right? Like, there's just all these I really think, yeah, I don't want to say things like, oh, it's going to totally change, because everyone is saying that, right? Oh, AI, this is going to change everything. But it's really hard to imagine how the world of security doesn't just completely, um, you know, the possibility of the kind, and not just using AI to help with like threat detection. And I mean, that stuff's been around for a while. And I think the security community is now, after a few years of being sold some stuff that just doesn't work, they're a little more cautious about using AI to do, some of the normal cybersecurity and information security tasks. What's interesting to me, though, is the security for like AI chatbots or other kinds of models, right? How do you keep them secure? And that's where, I think that there's a high likelihood that it won't just be traditional cybersecurity techniques now applied to the ML world. There will probably be this whole new, this whole new set of principles, or not principles, but, practices. And, it'll be a while before they get any principles, because any new technology, right, you get usually code wins code first, and then you're like abstract out the kind of like your book, right? The fundamentals of data engineering, right? Like once I saw a book like that, I knew that data engineering was like a thing now, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's like, okay, there's now enough agreement, tooling, arguments that we can now simply say, look, there's some pretty good principles here that we can extrapolate.
Mm-hmm.
So I expect there will be many, many years of, particularly in the security world, how do we make these machine learning models or these LLMs more secure? It's a hard problem.
It's so hard.
The other thing that frightens me too is from and not to get too political, but from like a nation state point of view,
Mm-hmm.
right? Even GitHub early on had some DDoS stuff from, that was originating from other nation states, and it was questionable whether, okay, are these just some bad actors, or is there literally like some geopolitical thing going on where it's like, yeah, let's go hit GitHub, because then every company in America that's using GitHub is now, right? I have, weird dystopian nightmares about that too, where you've got people or groups building targeted LLMs, an LLM targeted just for you, Joe, right? Like, imagine that. And maybe you don't know it's an LLM, and maybe it's like kind of multimedia, and it sends you a message on Twitter, and then it sends you a text message, or it sends you this or that. And I mean, before that would be a lot of work for like a Fisher or any, even if it was like espionage, trying to recruit you, or, say, hey, we know you're unhappy at your job at this, federal lab, and I just want to be your friend. And then they kind of, after a while.
Well, yeah, especially when you can deep fake all your friends and family too, right? I mean, you can have very convincing conversation. You would be none the wiser. I don't think any of us would know what the hell is going on, right?
Yeah,
that's awesome.
So to bring it back to data engineering, right? It's like, from a data engineering point of view, right? If you're in a company where you do have access to a lot of the engagement, either the text or the voice engagement with these agents, right? It's like, what are we gonna be asked to do, right? What kinds of audits or other kinds of things will grow out of that, and be added to the kind of the data engineering life cycle. Security is there for sure, but does it
I
change
don't
some of that.
I don't think we didn't foresee the world that we're in a year, from when we hit publish on the book, right? It's like some things have changed since then. And the thing is, it's playing out in real time too. So I don't know what any of us are in for down the road. And today also, incidentally, June 14th is when this is recorded, but the EU's AI Act, at least the official draft, had been passed, and so that's kind of a watershed moment for the world too, because the direction is being set for government regulation. And as the EU goes, it seems the rest of the world follows, unless you don't want to do business in Europe or European citizens, in which case, good luck with that. So, yeah, and it's the U.S. has their own. I mean, hell, even Utah, where we live, they're talking about some AI regulation from Utah now, and I have no
Really?
idea. Yeah, I have no idea what that looks like. I mean, with the other cyber laws here, so I'll just leave it at the word interesting. That I, so some of these people, I wonder if they can spell AI, but that's a different question. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, that's always been a problem, right? With politicians and technology, where you're just like, what? Like, you got all this room of politicians, and they're all voting on what was the really I was just talking about this the other day. It was it was some of the early protections where internet service providers weren't allowed to capture or benefit or benefit from your web traffic, right?
Right.
And then suddenly that protection was just removed, and now ISPs are like probably who knows what they're
Oh, that was
selling.
was
Or
it net neutrality? Was
yes,
it different? Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It was all packaged in with that. Yeah,
Yeah. And the US, it's interesting too, because I feel like the US approach to things is, I don't know, we always tie it back to commercial interests. I mean, less so, I just dropped a podcast today with my talking with my friend Marielle, who's helping with she's helping with the AI Act, but also with the Council of Europe. So they have a separate um, piece of legislation that more deals with human rights with AI. Of which I think she said the U.S. has actually signed on to it, right? But that's the other component, is we talk about the commercial and technical interest, but it's also what human rights do we want to guarantee, or protect? I suppose you can't really guarantee rights, but you can protect them. And so, that's 46 nations so far, I believe. So that's the U.S. included. But it's interesting because separately, China has their own AI regulations they're going full steam ahead with, and that's more incorporating their social values, which are very unique to China, into how they want to do stuff. So I think she said they sued somebody recently, or like brought the first like generative AI case, to justice. It was a deep fake, and I certainly wouldn't want to be that person that got busted. China's a different story when they go after you. So
oh yeah, yeah, and they've I think they've shown what you can do when you take particularly some of the advanced machine vision, and now some of these LLMs. I don't know if they were using LLMs, um, but in terms of targeting either individuals or groups, right? And so again, not too political, but the ethnic group of Uyghurs that live in China, right? I think it's pretty,
it's a known thing at this point. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not. I remember years and years ago seeing about it and trying to tell people like, "Oh goodness, this is this is not good." And so yeah, hopefully some of these laws and protections that are coming out can build around that. But it's tricky because as professionals who work in the field, we don't even know what's going to happen. So how are any?
I think with the EU stuff they've done as good of a job as they're probably going to be able to do. I mean, they've taken a lot of input, and the thing is, the people I know who have helped with the legislation, it's not like these are a bunch of like bureaucrats. Like they actually understand, AI and NLP and so forth. So I mean, they're making informed, as far as best we can tell today informed decisions. But again, it's hard to anticipate where this all goes. I mean, I will say it's interesting. I was having a cordial debate online with some friends about this, and some are like, "Well, we don't need regulations at all." I'm like, well, I don't know if that's a proper stance either. I mean, this thing's I think this is one situation where you need to get ahead of it. How you do that, it's I think you're just gonna have to take the best stab you can, and but I think we see what
Yeah.
happens if you don't make an attempt to do anything. You just you get Cambridge Analytica, for example. But it's I mean, could that be prevented with this? I don't know. I mean, that's above my pay grade. So I'm not
Yeah,
taking
no,
this.
I agree though. It's harder to get protections and laws in place than it is to update them, and modernize them, right? So it's a good move, even if hopefully, yeah, that there's that sense in which, okay, in 5 years, maybe a lot of these will be revisited. Maybe it's not a big deal. Maybe I don't know. The history of AI is weird that way, and
Mm-hmm.
um, irrational exuberance, I think, is probably just the best way to put estimates in the
Mm-hmm.
history. The story goes in the 50s when DARPA or the Defense Department, came to these group of scientists, and engineers, and linguists, and philosophers, and mathematicians, and said, "Hey, um, can you build something that will, translate Russian technical journals into English?" Oh, yeah, 6 months. I think that was the initial estimate. Yeah, we can have it in 6 months. And here we are, like 70 years later. And machine translation is pretty good, but it's a little off from. I mean, none of us are good at estimating work, right? In our sprints and
Right.
stuff. It's like, okay, I like to say developers are the most optimistic people on the planet, right? We're like, oh, I can do that in an hour, right? It doesn't matter. Yeah. It doesn't matter how much experience you meet someone like, oh yeah, it should take me like an hour. And then
Mm-hmm.
like 3 hours later, like, I got it wrong again. But yeah, 6 months to like 70 years, I think is that's a little too much. So yeah, I mean, we'll see where it ends up, but
We'll see where it goes. Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, it's been a great chatting with you. Hope you have a good day. I hope you get some rest from the alert fatigue. So
yeah,
yeah, it happens. But
literal fatigue, right?
yeah, right. Yeah. For people who want to learn more about you, where can they find you?
I guess I'm on LinkedIn. I'm not really a big social media person. So LinkedIn is probably the only place I'm at right now. I do like to hang out in the Mastodon um, infosec.exchange. That's a pretty cool instance. If you're looking for, I'm not an information security professional, but I enjoy being around information security people.
Couldn't tell.
Yeah, and just seeing everything. So those are really the only two places I'm at. Yeah.
Cool. Sounds good. Well, yeah, thanks for being on the show, and thanks for the great conversation. So we'll see
Yeah,
you.
thanks.
Hopefully, see you in Utah at some point. So whenever you make it up to Salt Lake, yeah, drop me a line. We'll go meet up. So
Okay, yeah, for sure. Thanks, Joe.
yeah, thanks, Josh. All right, take care. Bye.
Okay, bye.